children go to school in the public school system. We will also discuss a little bit about your rights in the workplace setting. And I just want to say from the beginning, this is an informal workshop. It's not intended to create any client relationship between yourself and CAIR-Michigan. And it's intended to be for educational purposes, but not intended to be legal advice. So if you have any specific legal questions about something that you or your child are facing, I ask that you talk to us afterwards and we can discuss that in private, inshallah. So today we're going to talk about your rights, and specifically we're going to talk about the rights that come from the First Amendment. The majority of the rights we obtain come from the U.S. Constitution. However, there are some repeated laws as it pertains to your rights of your children in public school that affect their rights and actually strengthen your constitutional rights. But all of the rights we're going to talk about today derive from the First Amendment, which has several clauses in it. But specifically, we're going to be talking about the clause that prohibits the government from infringing on your free exercise of religion or abridging your right to free speech, meaning as to kind of limit your right to free speech and to assemble within the public school system. How many people here have children in the public school system? How many people are aware of the laws that actually the government from infringing on your free exercise? It's not something that we always think about or we always consider when we're talking about a public school, but the public school system is the government by nature. The people who run your public school is the Board of Education, and they are elected officials, which makes them the government. So the Constitution often protects our rights, or it only protects our rights from the government. So your children have full constitutional rights when they enter the public school system. Just because they're children and just because they attend a school setting does not mean that they waive their rights when they enter the door. And that's settled by Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land, law. But our constitutional rights are not protected against other things other than the government, right? So like my children will be like, that's not fair. I can say that if I want. That's free speech. And I always respond with, well, do I look like the government? I don't look like the government, so you don't have a right of free speech in my house. So that's kind of how free speech works, because we hear a lot of misunderstandings about speech. But speech is only protected, and your rights for religion are only protected against the government and in some circumstances from your employer. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So I just want to start off by saying, just because your child goes to public school does not mean that they can't pray in public school. Students have an absolute right to pray on public school grounds. And what does this look like? This means that schools must allow your children to leave class to pray, so long as your children are not creating a disruption for other students' learning. They have to provide a clean, safe, and quiet space for students to perform prayer. And a lot of schools, if you make a request, especially high schools that have a larger Muslim population, will actually provide a space or a media room or some place that's carpeted where children can pray in Jamaat. They'll allow that to happen when the children are of age. And when they're a little bit younger, maybe middle school, because middle school kids often engage in shenanigans, they will have them pray independently. So what you need to do is you need to, communicate the needs of your children with the public school system. CAIR-Michigan sends out a notice every year to public schools that we know have a large Muslim population, advising them of their obligation to accommodate Muslim students for the prayer. And we advise them that they have to provide them with a space in the bathroom to make wudu, so that they can wash before they pray, that they have to provide them with a quiet room where they're not going to be interrupted, that's clean, and that the children have to be allowed to leave for 5 to 10 minutes at the appropriate times. And since our prayer is based on the sun, we know that the times can change slightly from, the beginning of the school year to the middle and then again to the end. So we should be communicating those times regularly with our students' schools so that they're able to do that. Furthermore, students can pray or make dua with their hands or however they want before, during, and after all after-school activities, including activities that are held on school grounds and including school-sponsored sport or extracurricular activities. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize is if you have like a high school, for instance, that has a large Muslim student population and they have a Muslim student association, your children can arrange to have Juma prayer held at the public high school. If the school allows the school building and school rooms to be used by student groups for extracurricular activities after school, then you can have Islamic speakers come in, and you can have a kitab come in every Friday and give khutbah, salat al-Juma every Friday within the public school system. It's done routinely in a lot of public schools around the state of Michigan. And when that happens, the prayer has to be directed by the students, the speakers have to be invited by the students, and the school cannot interfere in that. The other thing about religion in school is that the school can't force your child to do anything that is quote unquote religious or religious expression because they feel like that's what they have to do. They are not allowed to direct worship. So while student organizations in most schools are required to have an advisor that's usually a teacher or an administrator, the teacher or the administrator can't direct students to do anything. And I know some schools, I don't know if Lansing does it, but some schools have went back to like the Pledge of Allegiance or things like that, where they are asking children to say one nation under God and things like that. They can't require your child to do that. The same as they can't require them to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance or to salute the flag or to stand for the national anthem, as that under most normative Islamic teachings, that would be a violation of our religious principles. So they can't force them to do that. Okay. So when you have children in the public school system, students are entitled to what's called a reasonable religious accommodation for their sincerely held religious beliefs. And the law is clear that students are entitled to those reasonable accommodations. The courts have determined that an accommodation is reasonable when it does not substantially interfere with the school's normal business or cause a substantial disruption to the school or learning environment. And whether or not something is part of your child's sincerely held religious belief really has to do with your family and your child's belief system. It can't really be challenged. So sometimes when we see people asking schools for an accommodation, we'll see the school saying, well, you have to get a letter from the imam, or we need to know where this is taught so that you have to prove that you have to do this. That's just not the case. You never have to prove that something is part of your religion in order to get an accommodation. It doesn't have to be a mandatory part of your religion, right? In order to get an accommodation, you have to reasonably believe that what you're looking to do has some religious or spiritual benefit to you, and that not doing it would cause you some spiritual harm. That's the standard. And that is an objective standard a subjective standard based on your own understanding and belief. So it doesn't have to be something that's mandated by the religion. If it's part of the religion and you think that doing it benefits you either spiritually or religiously, or you might obtain sins by not doing it, that's sufficient to sustain your need for an accommodation. And what that looks like in the public school system is if there's a school uniform, then there has to be a modification of the school uniform that comports with religious beliefs of modesty. That means if your child is required to wear like a blue and white uniform, and they have to wear like a polo shirt or in khaki pants or whatever, it has to be modified to allow girls to wear the hijab. If skirts are required for the girls, they have to modify the skirt so that it's either a skirt or a long dress that comports with our understanding of modesty, or they have to be allowed to wear pants underneath it to comport with religious modesty. It also means that boys who are engaged in like gym or sports that are required to wear shorts, like for instance, my son plays soccer, they have to wear like little shorts to play soccer, that's their uniform. They have to provide an accommodation for those uniforms that comports for the boys with their sincerely held religious beliefs, meaning if shorts are required for a gym, the boys have to be allowed to wear loose, baggy shorts that go below the knees, or they have to be accommodated to allow them to wear some form of loose-fitting sweatpants that are not going to interfere with the activity. Girls are always allowed to wear leggings underneath their uniform, whether it's for sports or for academics, and are allowed to wear like loose-fitting tops and long sleeves. What the school can do in order to make it an accommodated, like a reasonable accommodation, is they can require that if the school uniform, for instance, is blue and khaki, that your child wears a blue or white or black hijab that matches the uniform, or they have to wear, if they wear like the school track uniform is like red and black, they have to wear like red pants or whatever, so that the child still matches the normal school uniform colors and they're not sticking out, but so they can mandate the color to make sure that the color is in line with the rest of the colors, so that, you know, Muslim girls aren't like wearing a blue and white uniform and then coming to school with a hot pink hijab and their friends can't wear like colored barrettes or ponytails and things like that. So to kind of make it equitable for everybody, they can put limits on the types of colors that the kids can wear. They're also, students are also entitled to single biological gender sports and physical education activities. Meaning, if you have a child with a biological male at birth that was, and they can't be forced to engage in physical sports activities with a non-biological male, or a girl, just because that individual might have a different gender identity than what they were born with. Because that is a reasonable accommodation. So they can't be forced to do that. And that includes physical education. If you can get your child into a single gender physical education class, if the school has the capacity to do that. I know schools in our area that have larger Muslim populations, they do that. They gender segregate sport activities or physical education activities, so that boys have one gym time and girls have a different gym time. Not every school can do that, but you can ensure that your child is only engaging in physical sports, like you're talking like contact sports, like soccer. I don't know if they still play floor hockey, soccer, floor hockey, basketball, like what have you. It's been a long time since I've been in school, so I'm not really sure what they're doing anymore. But with their same biological gender. And this includes swimming. There has been, I don't know if swimming is still mandatory for schools in Lansing, but swimming is still a mandatory education class for a lot of schools in the Metro Detroit area. And you have the right to request that your child not engage in co-ed swimming classes. And if you have an objection to them, and a lot of that has to do with the physical nature of swimming, the manner of dress and whatever, you can request a single gender swimming class. And if they can't accommodate that, you can ask for a different or an alternative option for that physical education activity for the period of time that they're engaged in swimming. If your child does swim, they're entitled to a religious accommodation of the swimming uniform, which means that boys are allowed to wear swim trunks that go below their knees, and they're allowed to wear a shirt so that their aura is not showing. And the same for girls. Girls are allowed to wear hijab. They're allowed to wear a modest swimsuit, also known as a burkini. I think that's the fancy name for it, right? If they want to do that. So you're allowed to, like, gender mixing as much as possible can be limited in the public school setting when it's necessary to comport with religious requirements. Also, students are permitted to have excused absences for all religious holidays and other important religious observances. So for certainly, this would include Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr, as well as like Ashura and many other days where congregational prayers and other religious observances are important and necessary. This would also include for like janazah services, wedding services, any service or any religious observance that requires congregational prayer or any form of other formal religious observance that supersedes the need to be in school. Children are entitled to have those days excused, which means you can call the school, tell them we have Eid, possibly Tuesday or Wednesday next week. My child's probably not going to be here one or both of those days, and the school has to excuse it. And if a teacher, especially when we're talking about K through 12 schools. It's a little bit different at universities, and that's something that we're trying to change right now through changing the law. But in K through 12 schools, if the child has an excused absence for a religious holiday, if there's a test that day, the teacher cannot mark them down for not taking that test that day. The test has to be given to them on a different day. The teacher can give it to them a day before, or they can give it to them when they return, but they must be given an alternative day to turn in homework, testing. If there was like some kind of in-class requirement for participation that day, they have to be excused from it. They cannot be penalized academically for taking time off for religious observances. When it comes to colleges, right now, most colleges in the state of Michigan allow a teacher to make a case-by-case basis for whether or not they'll give the time off, or they'll give like an extension or an alternative date for a test or a quiz or any type of formal assignment. That is something we wrote a law last year. We have it introduced into the legislature. So call your state representatives and state senators and ask them to vote for the Testing Your Faith Act so that our college students can have the right to have time off for Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr, which this year both of those holidays are going to fall right in the middle of the academic calendar year. Also, when we're talking about religious observances at school, your child's entitled to accommodations during Ramadan if they're fasting. This means that what Ramadan accommodations might look like, it looks like an alternative place for Muslim students to sit during their lunch period, so that they don't have to sit in the cafeteria while everybody else is eating. Maybe they are allowed to sit in an empty classroom or in the library where they can rest, they can engage in reflection, or maybe they can put their head down for a little while and take some rest, because they know it's a little bit more difficult on them when they're fasting. They're also, if your child has physical education during the period of Ramadan, they should be allowed to have an alternative assignment. Maybe, I know like they're still doing the presidential fitness test where everybody has to run a mile. Maybe if it's like the middle of Ramadan and your child's supposed to run a mile, maybe they're excused from running a mile and instead they can walk the mile, or they can do something with less physical activity, or they can be given more frequent rest breaks during their gym period, and especially when there's like a significant physical exertions going on. So what about facilities accommodations? I know there's a lot of talk going around in the country right now with all gender, single gender bathrooms. There's a guidance given from the Federal Department of Education that indicates students should be able to use the restroom and locker room of their perceived gender as opposed to their biological gender. That is not a law, that is a guidance. So any school that tells you that that's a requirement that they allow a boy to enter a girl's bathroom or vice versa, that's just not true. That's not the law. It's not a requirement. And this has come up in many circumstances across the state of Michigan. And Muslim students are entitled to single-sex bathrooms and locker room facilities so that they can maintain their level of modesty, which means if your school is one of those schools that allows an individual to use the locker room or the restroom of their choice, of their perceived gender instead of their biological gender, they have to provide an alternative place for your student. If your student is a girl, they have to be provided with a single-use restroom, or they have to be provided with a restroom that is only for biological girls in order to provide them with a religious accommodation. And this goes the same thing for locker rooms. And this is something that should be insisted upon. And that means that students are using the staff single-use restroom, then so be it. That's what the teachers are going to have to share their bathroom. And what it also means is if you have a school, we have a school in Canton that's 6,000 kids. I'm not exaggerating. It's 3 schools, but they're all on the same campus. 6,000, probably close to 8,000 kids this year, but it's somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 kids. There are probably a third to 40% of those students are Muslim students. And they have a system where you can choose the gender in the locker room of your perceived gender as opposed to your biological gender. And they have made an accommodation where the Muslim students could use the teacher's lounge bathrooms in each of the schools. It's a single user restroom. But this means that if you're talking 30% of 6,000, which is why I use 6,000 and not 8,000, because lawyers are not allowed to do math. It's literally considered malpractice, I think. But so if you're talking like 1/3, you're talking 2,000 students are relegated to using 4 bathrooms across 3 schools. That's not fair. That is not a reasonable accommodation, and we fought really hard to get them to do something different. But that's the kind of thing that you need to be keeping an eye on. We had a lot of kids coming to us saying, I can't use the bathroom during the school day because I don't have time to go wait in a line to use the restroom. So those are things, like anything that they do has to be equitable. What we know is like less than 2% of the U.S. population right now identifies as having a different gender than their biological gender, less than 2%. We also know that if it's less than 2% in the natural population, that's probably less than 2% in most school populations as well. So you can't allow 2% of the students to dictate how 40% of the students have to use the bathroom, because that's not equitable. And these are the things that parents need to be monitoring and utilizing when they're advocating for their students on campus. So what about in the classroom? In the classroom, so during 8th grade, and also in high school again, and it's dependent on year, depending on how your high school does it, world religions is a topic that's taught. It's part of the Michigan curriculum. But under no circumstances should Muslim students be put on the spot to address or discuss their religion in a way that puts them on the defense about their faith. Materials that are shared in a classroom should be appropriate. They should be appropriate to not just to the content that they're serving, but they have to be accurate historically, they have to be fair, and they have to be appropriate for the students to represent the faith itself. So under no circumstances should students be asked to defend their faith to peers or staff because the teacher presented something that has an Islamophobic, anti-Arab, or Orientalist trope in it, which happens from time to time. This means that lessons and materials or discussions that contain these types of content should not be in the classroom. This also means that materials depict accurate descriptions of our faith, what our faith history looks like, what our tradition looks like. And this includes every year, I think this is the first year that we have not gotten a comment. The first year in 8 years I've been with CAIR-Michigan during 9/11, where we did not get somebody calling us saying that their kid's teacher made an Islamophobic comment or had an Islamophobic discussion or shared some materials about 9/11 that was not debunked as later being inaccurate and kind of controversially fake, honestly. This is the first year, so we're alhamdulillah that didn't happen this year, but almost every year 9/11 comes around and somebody's teacher says something that they shouldn't have. It's only going to be worse probably with the anniversary of October 7th coming up and the genocide that's taken place and the discussions that have been taking place politically with the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. But those types of historical sensitive discussions should not be taking place in classrooms with young students when there's not context and background given that's appropriate and can create a meaningful and in-depth conversation about those things. And under no circumstances should we be sharing in classrooms material or content considered to be academic content that comes from a propagandized source. So it's very important to be diligent and to understand your children's curriculum. One of the laws I talked about the state of Michigan has that strengthens your rights as parents and as students in a public school system. Michigan has a law that actually says that parents are partners in education with their school district, that they have a right to review, criticize, critique, and help develop curriculum for their students, which means you can go to the school and say, I want you to show me what you're using to teach X, Y, and Z material. And if it's not appropriate, you can actually go to the school board and be like, this is not appropriate material. I don't want it taught in my classroom, because that's your constitutional and legal right. And we should be exercising those rights a lot more because I am telling you the stuff that goes on in school sometimes really puts our children on defense. If you find, it is also true that students do not have to participate in lessons that contain content that is against our moral and religious values. Michigan has the right to opt out of these contents, and we're talking about material that talks about sexually explicit behaviors, there are a lot of books. My son brought home his book list from his English teacher this year. There's not a single book on that list that I would let my student read. None of them. Every single one of them has content in there that is morally reprehensible because it contains racist tropes, Islamophobic tropes, or ideas about sexuality. It is not just like LGBTQ stuff. I'm talking about like sexually explicit material. So we need to be looking at our books. You can opt out of all of those. They have to find an alternative resource. These books are used to teach a concept. That concept is like anti-racism. The concept that they're learning about right now in his class is about like systems of oppression and disenfranchisement of groups of minority individuals, and they're doing it through like literature themes. So the content is what they have to do, and if the material is inappropriate, they have to find them appropriate material that covers the same type of themes and concepts. But we have to be partners with our schools. We have to know what's going on in the classroom in order to do that. And you can always opt out of anything that conflicts with Islamic values, or anything that's sexually explicit. So, like, I have the book up here called Persepolis, and Persepolis has been a pervasive problem around the country for about a decade now. On the surface, it looks like it should be a good book. My daughter's French teacher, when she was in 11th grade, used one excerpt out of Persepolis because it's written in French. It's written by an Algerian Muslim woman who lived in France as an Algerian refugee. And her teacher picked this book specifically because my daughter was in her class. Because we're from Africa, well, I'm not, her dad is. So she's from Africa. And this book was written by an African refugee living in France. It was in French, so they could read it in its native language. And it had a main character and an author, both that are Muslim women, right? The problem with Persepolis is when you read the book, it's about the Iran Revolution, and which is a very complex political topic that high school kids in one excerpt of a French class can't figure out. And it's actually Islamophobic and full of Orientalist tropes. It paints our men as kind of harsh and abusive, and it paints the hijab as oppressive. And in the end, the girl took off her hijab and felt liberated. That's the theme of this book. So while on the surface, the teacher had very benign and very good intentions for teaching this book, the book itself was problematic and led to my daughter having to defend Islam and why she wears her hijab in the classroom, which is something we want to avoid. So these types of materials are used sometimes unintentionally with good intentions, and sometimes they're intentional to place ideas in the students' minds about how things should happen. The other thing that I want to talk about specifically with this topic is health, sex education, or reproductive education in Michigan can always be opted out. It used to be that they had to notify you your child was going to take sex ed, and then you had to sign a paper giving them permission. They no longer do that in most school districts. The law changed. They had to notify you that they're going to be taking reproductive health, but they don't have to identify the fact that you can opt out and you don't have to opt them in. But if you don't want them to take it, you have to go to the school now and say, I don't want my child to take this class. Instead of having to give them permission to get in the class, you have to now give them permission to get out. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind. And most schools start teaching reproductive health around 5th or 6th grade at some level, so it's not something that's just being taught in high school. And there's a lot of things that are taught in reproductive health that go against mainstream and normative Islamic teachings that maybe you don't want your child exposed to outside of the home, where you can have a certain type of conversation with them. So that's something to keep in mind. So I want to talk a little bit about freedom of speech in the schools, and then we'll talk about food service, and I'll turn it over to Sister Zainab, who's going to talk about bullying. But freedom of speech in schools, like I said at the beginning, your child does not lose their constitutional rights just because they came to class. They come to class with their rights fully intact. So they enjoy freedom of speech so long as their freedom of speech is not disruptive to other students' learning environment. Almost all speech in the United States is protected, and that's unfortunate, and it's also fortunate for a lot of reasons. It's fortunate because there's a free flow of ideas, and there's not one person or body who gets to decide what's legitimate speech or not. Because if somebody could do that, we'd all be in trouble, because they could say, we don't like what you're saying, we don't agree with it, we think it's reprehensible, so you can't say it. The problem with that is also that people can say reprehensible things and false things and things that we know are not true and hateful things, but there's nobody that can police that, except for in the public school system. That's the one place. So students can say anything they want about politics in the public school. They can say anything that they want about religion in the public school. The difference is if you were like in the real world, you could say hateful speech in public. In a public school, you can't say hateful speech because that's inherently disruptive to other people's safety in their learning environment. So hateful speech is not protected in a public school. And engaging in speech type activities that are disruptive to the learning environment is not always 100% protected either. However, we saw after October 7th, we saw some students in public schools, especially high schools, being reprimanded for engaging in speech. I can tell you that there are things that are speech that are not always like what we would traditionally think of as speech, right? I'm speaking, this is definitely speech. What we write on paper is generally like considered to be like traditional speech, but other things are speech as well. Boycotting, divesting, sanctioning, that's considered to be legitimate speech. Your child calling for the public school system to divest is legitimate public speech. Your child wearing a keffiyeh to school is legitimate speech. Wearing clothing that identifies you as a certain thing or has a certain message is considered to be speech. And wearing clothing that is not profane has generally been held to be legitimate, peaceful speech in a public school system. Like it can't have curse words or anything like that on it, but the keffiyeh is fine, the hijab is fine, the thobe is fine. Even the Palestinian flag, wearing it to school is fine. None of those things can be considered to be disruptive speech. So also artwork is considered to be speech. If your child is in an art class and they make an art project, that's inherently considered to be creative speech, even if it has no words on it. So things that we might not consider to be traditional speech is speech. And one thing about speech is that just like you can't be forced to not speak your own mind is actually the legal term that they use. You can't be forced to speak somebody else's mind either, which means your child cannot be compelled to speak anything. And I'm going to say something that's very controversial, so I'm just going to put that out there for everybody. There's a lot of talk about misgendering people, using pronouns for people that they choose their specific pronouns. If your child has a religious objection to using a pronoun that does not match someone's gender identity, because their gender identity does not match their biological sex, they do not have to use that pronoun. It's not hateful, it's not offensive, it is their absolute right. So you do not have to use a female pronoun for a biological boy, and your child does not have to either. Does that mean we should be harsh to them? It does not. Does it mean that maybe we don't use pronouns at all and maybe we just call them by their name so we can, be more respectful to them? Maybe it does, but they can't be forced to use pronouns that don't comport with biological gender at birth. And you can also, and that also goes for not having to say the national anthem or sing the Star Spangled Banner or whatever they do at sporting events nowadays. So you can't be compelled to speak just like you can't be silenced from your legitimate speech. So we're going to talk a little bit about food service. Governor Whitmer enacted, I think 2 years ago, free lunch for all program in the state of Michigan, which means all students are entitled to free lunch at school, regardless of need. It used to be need-based. But even if you're not entitled to free lunch at school and you have to pay for it, which you did in the past, you're still entitled to a reasonable accommodation with your meat servings if you eat halal. Which means if your school offers a lunch program, they have to provide a nutritious and appropriate alternative to non-halal meat, which means several things. When schools put out their lunch, like Michelle Obama was really big on school lunches. She talked about the food pyramid. She talked about all of these. What people don't realize is that school lunches have to comply with FDA standards related to how many calories they are and what nutritional markers they meet with regards to protein, dairy, fruits, vegetables, all of that. They have to comply with that, which means if part of their caloric intake and meeting that protein is a meat option, they have to provide a just as nutritious non-meat protein option for your students. If you have a large population of Muslims in a specific school, you could definitely advocate for halal meat, and some schools have it, but there has to be a definite need for it, right? There have to be enough children eating that meat every day to make it worth their while, because it is, quite frankly, a little bit more expensive than the regular meat. But your child is entitled to a meat option or a protein option that is not meat if you are observant of the restrictions of halal. I'm just going to quickly talk about the rights to assemble and address grievances, which this basically means your child has if your school allows a chess club, a math club, debate club, whatever club, it has to allow a Muslim student association. It has to allow Students for Justice for Palestine. It has to allow any other type of organization. Failure to do so is called viewpoint discrimination. If they say you can't have an MSA because it's religious in nature, that's discriminatory. They might not have to fund your MSA, and you might have to fund it yourself because they can't entangle their government funds with religion, but they have to allow you to organize it. This also means if you don't like what a school administrator is doing, you don't like your curriculum, you don't like policies at your school, students themselves have the right to go to the administration and address those grievances. They should do it respectfully, they should do it articulately, but they have the right to do it, and they cannot be disciplined for it at all. And the students have the right to plan and attend public demonstrations and protests to address grievances with the school and to address political issues that are happening. This means your child can have a protest outside of their public high school if they want to. I know students, like, walkouts are a big thing for high school. That's a little bit of a gray topic, whether a walkout is legal and permissible in a public high school or not, because does it cause a disruption? Maybe. It depends on how many people walk out and how much noise they're making. But if schools have historically allowed walkouts for, like, climate strike, which is a big deal, every year there's a climate strike walkout in every high school in the state of Michigan. If they allow that, they can't prohibit a walkout for a different topic just because they don't like what they're saying. So students have the right to form their own groups that are politically, religiously aligned with themselves, and to act upon those groups and to address grievances with the government. So I have questions here, but we're going to move to Sister Zainab, Zaina, who's going to talk about a different topic. So look at that, that's all my stuff I was supposed to do today. She's going to talk about a different topic, and then we'll take questions at the end, inshallah. Oh, sorry. Oh, you need to. Yeah. Oh, that's fine. You don't have it now. Is that good? Once you tell it, that's fine. Oh, I should pop that. It doesn't make a difference. I don't work for you. Okay. Can you do it in Canada? No, you probably can. We can close to that. No, that's not. That's not really right. That's not moving at all. Oh, that's moving. Okay. No, it's passion. Yeah. Very technical difficulty, I apologize. Can you open the candle? I can do that now. Is it showing up there? No. I don't know because I was just looking at on thing, so it used to be 1 and 2. No, no, I mean, everything was the same.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Zaina and I'm the Director of Safe Spaces here at CAIR-Michigan. And today I would like to walk through a guide to address bullying. And I would go through a few topics such as what is bullying, some statistics about bullying, the types, and where does bullying occur in schools, some of the impacts, how to know if you're being bullied or if your child is being bullied as well. So a little bit about CAIR-Michigan. CAIR-Michigan is the Council of Islamic Relations, and it's the largest American Muslim civil rights organization, and it advocates for civil rights, it promotes justice, and it empowers American Muslims while enhancing the understanding of Islam as well. So here are some of the topics that I would go to, and then at the end we have some resources and how to connect with us as well. So what is bullying? Bullying occurs whenever one person intentionally tries to hurt one another, either emotionally or physically. It can occur anywhere throughout comments in class, notes left on personal belongings. Frequently, these hurtful words or actions occur more than once or have potential to occur more than once and come from a person in a place of power. Bullying can be from peer-to-peer or teacher and administration relationships with students.
Here are some of the statistics specifically for Muslims being bullied in school. It says that 1 out of each 5 students report being bullied. And then we have 70% of Muslim students reported feeling unwelcome in schools or disrespected at schools. So it's like a serious topic within the Muslim community here. Some examples of bullying, it can be through verbal communication, social, physical, and cyber. And I see a few kids here. Who can give me an example of how bullying can be a verbal communication? How can somebody bully you by verbally bullying you? Yes. Yes, that's correct. Oh, he said not saying kind things and being rude. So verbal can be name calling, threats, even sexual comments, taunting, insulting comments. It could be also related to you being a Muslim. We have some social, which is like spreading rumors, excluding others on purpose. We have some physical, like hitting, shoving, kicking, pitching, spitting, like whatever it can be. And then we have some cyber. Cyber is anything related to electronic devices or communication, whether it was on social media or online, spreading rumors or spreading hateful comments as well. And then here are some spaces that bullying can occur. Classrooms, school buses, hallways, after school programs even, or public spaces like in the malls or in the streets. So here are some impacts that can happen after somebody being bullied. We can have increased depression, anxiety, stress, crying, acting out, or even suicidal thoughts sometimes. And some things that can be decreased are physical health, connection to society, academic performance, their grades becoming low, or school connectedness, that they don't feel like they're connected to school or wanting to go to school anymore. So how to know that you're being bullied? It's not always easy to identify or even admit that somebody is being bullied. So you can ask yourself some questions to know if you're actually being bullied in school, like, do other students make mean comments about me? Or have I ever been called hurtful names? Or am I being teased by the way I looked or the way I act as a Muslim? Or has someone ever touched me in a certain way that's not appropriate? Or has anyone ever damaged my personal belongings? So if any of these questions are answered yes, then probably you are being bullied, and we're going to go through a mechanism or how to ask for help or defend yourself if you're being bullied at school. So you think you are being bullied, what can you do? First, we need to identify what's stopping you from taking action and think about possible solutions. For example, if you're thinking like, I feel embarrassed and I don't want anybody to know, you need to remember that bullying is not your fault and no one ever deserves to be bullied, and you have the right to ask for help and assistance, whether it was from a principal, teacher, relative, or parent, or anybody in the school. Let's say you're saying, I don't want to be called a snitch. Well, remember that the goal is this label to silence you. So we don't want you to be silent, and we want you to speak up so that bullies and those that help them don't get in trouble. And also, when bullying isn't addressed, it can get worse. Let's say you're saying nothing is going to change even if I speak up. Well, remember that state laws vary, but they generally require that public schools or schools that receive public funding protect you from harassment and discrimination, and that you have the right to express yourself in your clothing or speech against bullying or harassment. Let's say if they say that you're convincing yourself that this only happens online, so it's not even in real life, that I shouldn't care about that. But also remember that just because it's online doesn't mean it's not bullying. Instead, document the harassment, take screenshots, or otherwise capture the content that includes your bullying and report it to an individual, a parent, or a school member. So number 2, if you think you're being bullied, what can you do? You can address the bullying by being your own self-advocate, so you can stand up for yourself. So a little bit about that is that you need to understand when and where it takes place and who is involved in that. That if you feel comfortable to even address it, then you can go ahead and do that. Or what would you like to change about the situation? So you need to think about it before you do it. And your role in this action plan, like how would it manifest? So you need to be aware that you need to be respectful, you need to be calm, you need to be confident, and you do not respond with harmful words or action, even if they're coming towards you. And if a situation is escalating, you need to stop and take a step back. So if you think that your child is being bullied, what can you do? We have 3 steps. You can first keep the lines of communication with your child open, know your child's friends, ask about how their day is going, and listen closely to any questions or concerns that they have. Second is know your child's rights. So if your child comes to you for support, you can either request a meeting with the school, which you have a full right to. You can send a follow-up email documenting the content of the bullying or a record of to hold the school accountable, or request and review the school's bullying policies and follow for the procedure of how they report that, probably if the school has a different procedure. And then the last thing is tell your child to talk to a trusted adult at the school if they're ever being bullied, and they can also advocate for themselves as well. So the school will not help my child, or it's ineffective. How can I speak about it, or who can I talk to? Well, you can report the instances of bullying to the district because it oversees the schools. If the school educator or staff are not supporting your child, or an adult at the school themselves are responsible for the bullying, like a teacher or an advisor, then go up to the chain of document within the school or district until the bullying stops. So you can advocate for your child in that way. Or of course, you can contact us here at CAIR-Michigan, and we will be able to provide you with the legal help that you need for your child. Or if you too wish file a complaint, we can also do that as well, either online format, through email, or through the telephone. So here are some of the resources that we would like to provide. There's a bullying prevention toolkit on the left from the Family and Youth Institute in Canton. And then we have in the middle the incident report care form. If you take a screenshot, it'll take you to the website where you can file a complaint. Or to the right, this is the guide to school bullying from CAIR National as well. And here's a bit of contact us information about where we're located, our phone number, and our email as well. Thank you.
Inshallah, we're going to take questions, and I see a very eager youth asking a question right in front.
Well, respectfully, doesn't matter what they think, because all we care about is you and your well-being. And if you're being targeted or harassed or bullied, you need to stand up for yourself or let an adult handle it and take care of it, because it's not right. Even if they would know that it annoys them, it's still not right. It doesn't make it right.
And the school has an obligation to take care of it until it's completely taken care of. Do you have any other questions?
Thank you very much. Very important. When you speak about schools and colleges, we speak about colleges and we want to
When we're talking about colleges, we're talking, like, the term college really incorporates colleges, universities, junior colleges, and trade schools. So you have even more rights at those schools, with the one exception of the time off for religious holidays is not something that's set in stone at every university or college. But other than that, like at most colleges and universities, you have more, like, because you're like more of a fully formed adult with full autonomy, you should have more rights. Your rights should be more intact, even though that's not always the case.
So just a question about the United States. They schools are allowed to let you assemble or are they required to, I understand they're not required to fund you, but are they required to provide you with like places to work or something?
So if the school allows other organizations spaces after, like for after school activities or evening events, then they have to allow MSAs and other organizations to have those spaces. So one thing that they're not required to do is provide that financial support court because the court has said in certain circumstances that could be like an unnecessary entanglement between government and religion. But outside of that funding aspect, everything else that they provide for other school groups, they have to provide for MSAs.
So I love how you covered what all of this is, but what if you're getting bullied anonymously from an anonymous exam, or especially in high school, or with notes from an anonymous person, or shooting that kind?
Well, if it's happening on school or school technology, maybe you can block that or report it and report it to the teacher. And also maybe the school has a way of finding out who's actually causing it. So you need to advocate for yourself and fight that out.
Thank you. Well, what you just said is so easy, that parents should do that kind of thing. But what if the parents themselves are bullied because of the, like you said, appearance or clothes or even the language barrier? Parents cannot go and stand up for their kids' rights if they do not speak the language and they need help with that aspect. So what program do you have for families to get help from CAIR or from other organizations?
Sure. So that's a really good question because we do know with our community that sometimes there is a language barrier. You have parents who maybe don't speak English, they don't know the system because they didn't grow up here, right? But that's why CAIR exists. CAIR is your community organization. We work on behalf of Muslims across the state of Michigan. So if there's an issue, you can reach out to our office. Savannah speaks Arabic. We have the ability to have other translation services for people who might speak other languages. And you can call our office. We're here. We do step in and do direct advocacy work, either through Savannah's Spaces Department if it doesn't reach a legal level, or if it does require the filing of a Department of Education complaint or some other legal maneuvering, that would be my department. Last year, after October 7th, we had a lot of parents calling us because their children were being bullied at the school and the school didn't really do anything. We filed a Department of Education complaint on behalf of a Palestinian student in Ann Arbor. The Department of Justice stepped in, immediately investigated that, and now the Ann Arbor Public Schools are under a consent agreement with the Department of Justice to take steps to sort of prevent what happened to that student from ever happening again. And that was a teacher-on-student bullying incident, and the parents were not able to advocate despite the fact that they did everything right. They went to the school board, they went to the school principal, and got no resolution. And then they came to us, and we elevated steps. So that's what CAIR-Michigan is here for. If you call our office and do an intake, you just send an email and do an intake, and somebody will get back to you, and we will address your needs and your concerns to the best of our ability and the most appropriate way under the circumstances.
I don't think the Lansing family has
Sure, the contact number's up there. You guys can screenshot it. Now it's going to be on your live stream on your Facebook, so it's memorialized. Once it's on the internet, it's never gone. We are on the internet, and we have been out. This is the first time I've been to this message, but we just come out to the website and say we do service the whole state, and we are more than happy to come out here and assist in any way that we can.
So testify Assalamu alaikum. I just had a question about workplace harassment or a job not letting take breaks for salah or wudu or personally my job I don't personally like to do wudu there because it's so dirty in public restroom or even in place salah. I end up just putting salah in my car. But what because I know I'm not sure running out of time, we're gonna touch on workplace stuff. What rights do we have at work? Basically what happened with me is that there was no one to cover it, right?
So that's a very fact-specific question. So the law is very clear that your work has to provide you with a reasonable religious accommodation as long as it doesn't cause them a substantial hardship. Last year, 2023, the Supreme Court redefined what substantial hardship is, and it's a very high burden for your employer, honestly. Like they have to prove that they would have to hire additional staff or shut down the entire plant basically in order to not give you that accommodation. So it is very fact specific, but when it comes to providing like a reflection room, that's not always going to be an option because that's like a more of a brick and mortar kind of a thing, right? But providing the time that you need is a definitive yes, unless there are some very specific circumstances that would prevent them from doing so. But that's something you can call our office and we can have a conversation about to see how we might be able to assist you in obtaining, at a minimum, the time that you need to be able to perform those services.
But if they refuse to do that, it'd be like not you or me, but is that like a social that's something you can
It can be, honestly. It can be. It can be like a EEOC complaint, like an administrative filing, or it can be a lawsuit, depending on the circumstances, honestly.
thank you.
And unless you're afraid of retaliation, don't want to your self-confidence. You be who you are as a strong business and do what you have to. And if they retaliate, that's what CAIR-Michigan is here. Any other sisters?
The sisters got it, like, they're on top of it much.
Brothers, anyone else? It is recorded, it's already live on Facebook. Any other questions? If not, I think we're getting close to the Salah time. Alright, so Jazakumullah Khair, Sister Amy Dakur and Sister Zainab Jadala. Now, Sister Amy has been 8 years with CAIR-Michigan and has been making multiple trips here to Lansing to fight various cases, even from within our community at MSU and LCC, numerous cases. Jazakumullah Khair. And while she did not ask for donations, this is an institution that's worthy of our donations. Because of our financial circumstances, we are not doing fundraising for them per se, but I strongly recommend that you make donations and support CAIR-Michigan so that they can continue to hire talented people like these two and help our community at large. Jazakumullah Khair.
I just want to say thank you guys for having us out here. We also brought some resources today. So there's a one-pager about your rights in public schools, a little bit of information about CAIR and the work that we did in 2023. And then for the college kids that are here that might be engaging in protest later, there are support right pamphlets up here. So please, make good use